My name is Donna, 53 years old, and I've always believed in the power of family. But last Thanksgiving, everything changed when my husband raised his glass and announced, "To a new beginning without you." My family froze in shock while his friends applauded. I simply took a sip of my favorite Cabernet, smiled back, and raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I echoed. What Andrew didn't know was that I was completely ready for this moment. If you're watching this video from your phone or computer, please hit like and subscribe to follow my journey after that defining moment. My story begins with what I thought was a perfect marriage of 28 years. Andrew and I met during our sophomore year at Boston University. He was studying business, and I was pursuing my passion for fine arts. We connected instantly at a campus exhibition where my watercolor painting was featured. Andrew wasn't particularly interested in art, but he pretended to be just to spend more time with me. I found his honesty about this pretense endearing when he confessed it on our third date. After graduating, we had a beautiful wedding at a historic church in Massachusetts. All our friends and family attended, and everyone commented on how perfect we were together. Andrew landed a job at a prestigious financial firm, and I began my career as an art teacher at a local high school. We settled into a cozy apartment in the city, dreaming about our future together. 2 years into our marriage, I became pregnant with our daughter, Lisa. It was a joyous time for us. Andrew got promoted, and we moved to a charming colonial house in suburban Connecticut. 3 years later, our son Mark was born, completing our family. I took a break from teaching to focus on raising our children, but I never abandoned my artistic pursuits. I converted our garage into a small studio where I could paint whenever I found time between diaper changes and bedtime stories. As the children grew, I gradually returned to my career, first part-time at a community art center, then eventually opening my own small gallery featuring local artists. The Donna White Gallery became a respected establishment in our community, known for discovering emerging talents. Andrew was supportive of my career, at least in the beginning. He would attend gallery openings, network with potential clients, and help with the business aspects I found challenging. Our life in Connecticut was picture perfect. We lived in a beautiful neighborhood with manicured lawns and friendly neighbors. We hosted summer barbecues, attended school functions, and took family vacations to Martha's Vineyard. Lisa grew up to be a thoughtful, intelligent young woman who followed her father's footsteps into business. Mark, more like me, pursued photography and visual arts. They both attended excellent colleges, graduated, and began building their own lives in different cities. About 2 years ago, when we became empty nesters, I noticed subtle changes in Andrew. It started with small things that I initially dismissed. He began coming home later from work. Our dinner conversations dwindled as he was constantly checking his phone. Business trips became more frequent and longer. When I asked about his day, his answers were vague and distracted. He seemed perpetually busy with work emergencies that required his immediate attention. Then came the secretive phone calls. Andrew would step outside or lock himself in his office to take certain calls. I noticed him rapidly closing email windows when I entered the room. Occasionally, I caught a whiff of an unfamiliar perfume on his clothes. Once, I found a restaurant receipt in his pocket from a place we had never visited together, with charges for 2 people. Being married for over 2 decades, I recognized these signs, but didn't want to acknowledge what they might mean. I tried to reignite the spark in our relationship. I suggested date nights at new restaurants, weekend getaways, to places we'd always wanted to visit, even a couple's retreat in Vermont that focused on reconnecting. Andrew always had excuses: work deadlines, important meetings, client emergencies. I even convinced him to try marriage counseling. We attended 3 sessions before he declared it a waste of time. The therapist was just trying to create problems where none existed, he said. Everything was fine. I was overreacting and being paranoid. For months, I tried to believe him. I wanted to trust that our marriage was as strong as I thought. But one night, as I watched Andrew sleeping peacefully beside me, I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us. The man I had shared my life with for nearly 3 decades felt like a stranger. I looked at his relaxed face, and wondered if I was losing him or if he was already gone. The truth revealed itself on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in September. Andrew had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter when he rushed out for an emergency meeting. I wasn't looking for evidence. I was simply closing the laptop when a notification popped up. An email from someone named Jessica with the subject line, "Can't wait for tonight." I know I shouldn't have opened it. Privacy is important in a marriage, but something in me needed to know. With trembling fingers, I clicked on the message. What I found shattered the foundation of trust I had built over 28 years. "Andrew, I've booked the room at our usual place. Can't wait to feel your arms around me again. These stolen moments are never enough. I dream of the day when we don't have to hide anymore. Just a little longer until we can start our life together. All my love, Jessica." Attached to the email was a selfie of a young woman, perhaps early 30s, with long auburn hair and a bright smile. I recognized her immediately as Andrew's new executive assistant, who had started at his firm 6 months earlier. I had met her briefly at the company Christmas party, where Andrew had introduced her as a talented new addition to his team. My hands shook as I scrolled through their email thread. There were dozens of messages dating back 4 months. They contained intimate details, secret plans, promises of a future together. In one particularly painful email, Andrew had written about feeling truly alive for the first time in years. They had weekend getaways planned, always disguised as business trips. They discussed their favorite restaurants, movies they'd watched together, and even shared inside jokes. I sat at our kitchen counter for what felt like hours, tears streaming down my face, my body trembling uncontrollably. The carefully constructed reality of my marriage crumbled around me. Every late night, every missed dinner, every distracted conversation now made perfect sense. The pain was physical, like someone had punched me in the chest and knocked all the air from my lungs. When Andrew returned home that evening, I confronted him with what I had discovered. His initial reaction was denial, claiming I had misunderstood friendly work correspondence. When I quoted specific lines from their emails, his face paled. He switched tactics, blaming work stress and a midlife crisis. He claimed it wasn't serious, just a temporary infatuation. "It means nothing, Donna," he insisted, his voice pleading. "It was a mistake. I got caught up in the attention from someone new. You and I have been together so long, sometimes I just felt, I don't know, invisible or taken for granted." He blamed me for being too focused on my gallery. He blamed his high-pressure job. He blamed our empty nest. He blamed everything except himself for his choices. As the night wore on, his excuses gradually gave way to promises. He would break it off with Jessica immediately. He would change jobs if necessary. He would recommit to our marriage. He begged for another chance. Despite the pain coursing through me, I found myself nodding. 28 years of marriage isn't something you throw away in one night. We had built a life together, raised children, created memories. Perhaps this was just a rough patch we could work through. I agreed to try to give him a second chance to prove his commitment. The following weeks were a strange performance of reconciliation. Andrew suddenly became attentive again, bringing home flowers, suggesting dinner at my favorite restaurants, even proposing a weekend trip to the Berkshires. He was present in conversations, asking about my day, showing interest in the gallery. He left his phone unlocked, and within view, a transparent attempt to rebuild trust. I wanted to believe in this renewed effort. I wanted to think we could heal from this betrayal, but something had fundamentally changed. The foundation of trust that had supported our marriage for nearly 3 decades had cracked, and I wasn't sure it could be repaired. Then, about 3 weeks after our confrontation, I found it. Andrew had fallen asleep in the shower, an odd habit he developed when particularly exhausted. His phone, left on the bathroom counter, lit up with a notification. A message from Jessica. "Miss you. When can we meet again?" That message was the final confirmation I needed. The betrayal wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was ongoing, deliberate, and had no sign of ending. That night, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. Instead of confronting Andrew immediately, I would begin gathering information. I would prepare myself for whatever came next. The next morning, I began monitoring Andrew's communications more carefully. I checked phone records, credit card statements, and bank accounts. I installed tracking software on our shared computer. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed to know the full extent of his deception. What I discovered was far worse than I had imagined. Andrew hadn't just been having an affair with his young assistant. He had rented an apartment in the city under a business name, presumably for their meetings. There were expensive gift purchases from jewelry stores and designer boutiques that had never made their way to me. Most alarmingly, I found evidence of significant money transfers from our joint accounts to a private account I had no knowledge of. After a particularly disturbing discovery about a bank account in the Cayman Islands, I decided to seek professional advice. I scheduled a discreet appointment with Sarah Johnson, a divorce attorney recommended by a gallery client who had gone through a similar situation. Sarah's office was in a neighboring town to avoid any chance encounters with acquaintances. "Unfortunately, what you're describing is not uncommon," Sarah told me after hearing my story, "but you're wise to gather information before taking action." Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, which means the court divides property fairly, but not necessarily equally. Given the circumstances and your long-term marriage, you should be entitled to a significant portion of the marital assets. She advised me to continue documenting everything: the affair, the hidden accounts, the secret apartment. She helped me understand my legal rights and potential financial outcomes. Most importantly, she gave me something I desperately needed: a sense of control in a situation where I had felt powerless. "Take photographs of valuable items in your home," she suggested. "Make copies of all important financial documents. Start thinking about what you want from this situation: the house, the gallery-specific investments. Being prepared gives you leverage." Over the next several months, I followed Sarah's advice meticulously. I built a comprehensive file of evidence: screenshots of text messages, copies of emails, bank statements, property records. I photographed our home's contents, compiled a list of assets, and documented the growth of my gallery business during our marriage. During this time, my emotions fluctuated wildly. Some days, the anger consumed me. I would find myself standing in our kitchen gripping the counter until my knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to scream or throw something. Other days, profound sadness would overwhelm me, and I would sit in my car in the gallery parking lot sobbing uncontrollably before composing myself to go inside. But gradually, something unexpected happened. As I took concrete steps to protect myself, the paralyzing pain began to subside. It was replaced by a steely resolve. I had spent nearly 3 decades building a life with a man who could discard it all for a younger woman. I had compromised, supported, and loved him through every stage of our marriage. Now, it was time to focus on protecting myself. I opened a separate bank account at a different bank and began transferring small amounts of money that wouldn't be immediately noticed. I updated my will and changed the beneficiaries on my personal life insurance policy. I consulted with a financial advisor about how to protect my interest in the gallery. One evening, I confided in my older sister Nancy during a private phone call. She lived in Oregon, far from our social circle in Connecticut, making her a safe confidant. I hadn't told anyone else, not even my closest friends or our children. "I always thought Andrew was too impressed with himself," Nancy said after I finished my story. "But I never imagined he would do something like this. What can I do to help?" "Just knowing I can talk to someone about this helps more than you know," I replied, feeling a weight lift slightly from my shoulders. "I'm building a case, gathering evidence. When the time is right, I'll be prepared." "You're handling this with remarkable strength, Donna," Nancy said. "But remember, it's okay to break down sometimes too. You're going through something traumatic." That night after our call, I allowed myself to cry one last time. I sat in my studio surrounded by my paintings, photographs of our family through the years, and mementos of what I had thought was a happy life. I cried for the young, hopeful woman who had stood at the altar with Andrew. I cried for the years invested, the memories now tainted. Then I wiped my tears and made a promise to myself. He will not see me fall apart. Whatever happens next, I will face it with dignity and strength. Thanksgiving has always been my favorite holiday. There's something special about gathering loved ones around a table filled with traditional foods, expressing gratitude for life's blessings. For 28 years, I had hosted Thanksgiving dinner in our home, perfecting my grandmother's recipes and creating new traditions with our family. This year, I approached the holiday with conflicted emotions. Part of me wanted to cancel the gathering altogether. How could I host a celebration of gratitude when my marriage was imploding behind closed doors? But another part of me, the stronger part, refused to let Andrew's betrayal disrupt this cherished tradition. So I proceeded with the preparations as usual. I ordered a 20-pound turkey from our local butcher, polished the silver serving dishes that had been wedding gifts, and created an elaborate centerpiece of autumn flowers and candles. I spent days cleaning the house, though it was already immaculate, and prepared homemade cranberry sauce pumpkin pies and my famous sage stuffing. Andrew seemed oddly enthusiastic about the holiday this year. He offered to select the wine, something he had never shown interest in before. He suggested inviting additional guests, including several couples from his firm that we weren't particularly close with. His sudden involvement should have been welcome, but it felt off, almost manic in its intensity. I noticed he was constantly checking his phone, smiling at messages from an unnamed contact. Once I passed by his office and heard him say, "Everything is arranged, just follow the plan." When he saw me in the doorway, he quickly ended the call, claiming it was a work colleague discussing a client meeting. Our guest list that year included my parents, who had driven down from Massachusetts, my sister Nancy, who had flown in from Oregon specifically because I had confided in her about my situation, Andrew's brother James and his wife Patricia, our daughter Lisa, who came home from Chicago, our son Mark visiting from Seattle, and 3 couples from Andrew's firm, including his boss Richard and his wife Susan. As I greeted everyone at the door that evening, I maintained a perfect hostess smile. My mother immediately sensed something was wrong, giving me a concerned look as she handed me a homemade apple pie. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she whispered. I nodded briefly, squeezing her hand to reassure her. The house filled with the comforting aromas of roasting turkey and baking pies. Conversation flowed alongside the wine Andrew had selected. On the surface, it appeared to be a typical family Thanksgiving, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I'm sure sensitive guests could detect. Nancy kept giving me supportive glances across the room. My father seemed to be watching Andrew with unusual scrutiny. When we finally sat down for dinner, I took my customary place at one end of the table with Andrew at the other. The turkey was golden and perfectly cooked. The side dishes were arranged beautifully in serving bowls around the table. Crystal glasses sparkled in the candlelight. It could have been a scene from a holiday magazine spread. After everyone was seated, Andrew stood up unexpectedly, raising his wine glass. This wasn't part of our usual Thanksgiving routine. Traditionally, my father offered a brief prayer of thanks before we began eating. Andrew's interruption of this tradition was jarring, but I maintained my composure. "I'd like to make a toast," Andrew announced, his voice carrying an unfamiliar edge of excitement. "This past year has brought many changes and opportunities. As we gather to give thanks, I find myself grateful for new beginnings." He paused, his eyes scanning the table before landing directly on me with a look I can only describe as triumphant cruelty. "To a new beginning," he continued, "without you, Donna." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged horrified glances. Nancy's hand clenched around her fork so tightly her knuckles whitened. Lisa and Mark stared at their father in disbelief. My in-laws looked away uncomfortably. Then Richard, Andrew's boss, began to applaud slowly. The other couples from his firm joined in as if this public humiliation of his wife was somehow worthy of celebration. I later learned they had all known about Jessica for months. Some had even covered for Andrew during his business trips. I felt 20 pairs of eyes on me waiting for my reaction. Would I break down in tears, storm out of the room, create a scene that would give them gossip material for months to come? Instead, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my favorite Cabernet. I savored the rich flavor, allowing it to linger before swallowing. Then I raised my own glass and met Andrew's gaze steadily. To new beginnings. I echoed my voice clear and unwavering. The confusion in Andrew's eyes was palpable. This wasn't the reaction he had expected or hoped for. He had orchestrated this moment to humiliate me, to establish dominance in our ending relationship. Instead, he was met with calm dignity that clearly unsettled him. We proceeded with the meal, making strange small talk about safe topics, like the unusually warm November weather and Lisa's recent promotion. I could feel my children's confusion and anger simmering beneath their polite exteriors. My parents maintained dignified silence, occasionally giving me supportive glances. As I served my homemade pumpkin pie with fresh whipped cream for dessert, I realized I felt an unexpected emotion relief. After months of secrets, evidence gathering, and preparing for this moment, it had finally arrived, and I had survived it with my dignity intact. The worst had happened in the most public way possible, and I was still standing. There was a strange freedom in that realization. Andrew seemed increasingly agitated by my composed response. He had expected tears, pleading perhaps even a dramatic exit. My calm acceptance had thrown him off balance, making his grand gesture fall flat. By the end of the evening, he was the one who seemed uncomfortable, not me. As our guests departed, offering awkward thanks for the meal, I stood at the door, with a pleasant smile, accepting their compliments on the food, as if nothing unusual had occurred. My sister Nancy was the last to leave, pulling me into a fierce hug. "You were magnificent," she whispered. "Call me tomorrow." When the door closed behind the final guest, I turned to face Andrew, who stood in the foyer, looking strangely deflated. "Well," he said, breaking the silence between us, "I guess we should talk about what happens next." The morning after Thanksgiving dawned with a strange sense of clarity. I had slept in the guest room, leaving Andrew alone in our marital bed. When I entered the kitchen, he was already there, nursing a cup of coffee, looking haggard and unrested. Without the audience from the previous night, his bravado had diminished considerably. "I think we need to discuss the logistics of our separation," he began without preamble. "I've been thinking we should sell the house and split the proceeds. You can keep your gallery, of course. It doesn't make much anyway." I said nothing, simply pouring myself a cup of coffee and sitting across from him at the kitchen island. My silence seemed to unnerve him, prompting him to continue filling the void with words. "I've already spoken with my lawyer. He recommends a clean split 50-50 on most assets. That's generous considering I was the primary breadwinner for most of our marriage." Still, I remained quiet, watching him grow increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, when he paused for breath, I reached for my tote bag that I had strategically placed on a nearby chair. From it, I withdrew a thick manila folder. "Before we discuss your generous offer," I said, my voice steady, "I thought you might want to review some information I've gathered." I opened the folder and began spreading documents across the counter between us. Email printouts with highlighted passages detailing his affair with Jessica, bank statements showing transfers to accounts I had never known about, credit card statements documenting dinners, hotel stays, and jewelry purchases, photographs of the apartment he had rented in the city under his company's name. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his face flushing with anger. "You've been spying on me." "I prefer to call it protecting myself," I replied calmly. After I found Jessica's first email, I thought it prudent to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I continued laying out documents, now including property records, investment account statements, and printouts of Connecticut divorce statutes. "This one is particularly interesting," I said, pointing to a bank statement from a Cayman Islands account. "I was especially curious about these deposits that coincide with your quarterly bonuses, funds that should have been considered marital assets." Andrew's face had gone from red to ashen. He attempted to gather the papers, but I placed my hand firmly on them. There's more, I continued. This is a report from a private investigator documenting your meetings with Jessica, including dates and times that conflict with business trips you claim to be taking. And here are statements from our joint account showing systematic withdrawals that were diverted to your private investments. This is ridiculous, Andrew sputtered, his confident demeanor completely evaporated. You'll never prove any of this is related. My lawyer will destroy these accusations. Perhaps, I conceded, but are you willing to risk your reputation at the firm? What would Richard say if he knew you were using company resources to fund your affair, or that you've been recording certain business expenses incorrectly for tax purposes? Andrew's expression told me I had struck a nerve. He had always been obsessively protective of his professional reputation. What do you want? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want 60% of all marital assets, I stated firmly. I want full ownership of the gallery and the vacation house in Vermont. I want to keep this house until I decide whether to sell it. And I want your full cooperation in making this process as quick and painless as possible. Andrew laughed bitterly. That's absurd. No judge would award you that much. You're probably right, I agreed. But are you willing to go through a public contentious divorce where all of these documents become part of the court record, where your colleagues, friends, and most importantly our children learn exactly how you've conducted yourself? I'll fight this, he threatened. I'll get the best divorce attorney in the state. I smiled for the first time that morning. You're welcome to call Thomas Franklin if you'd like. I believe he's considered one of the top divorce attorneys in Connecticut. Andrew's eyes widened in recognition of the name. Franklin. How do you know him? We went to college together, I explained. He was 2 years ahead of me at Boston University. We reconnected at an alumni event last year. Interestingly, he specializes in high-asset divorces with complicated financial situations. We've had several productive consultations over the past 6 months. The shock on Andrew's face was almost comical. For a man who prided himself on being in control, the realization that I had been methodically preparing for this moment was devastating. 6 months, he repeated incredulously. You've been planning this for 6 months. I've been protecting myself since I found evidence of your affair, I corrected him, and gathering information about our financial situation that you clearly never intended to share with me. I gathered the documents back into the folder my point made. I suggest you review my proposed settlement agreement. It's fair considering the circumstances, and it would allow us both to move forward without unnecessary public drama. The alternative would be unfortunate for everyone, particularly you. Andrew stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. I never thought you had this in you, he said finally. There are many things about me you never bothered to discover, I replied. Now I have a gallery to open. My settlement offer expires in 48 hours. After that, I'll be instructing Thomas to proceed with a less amicable approach. I left him sitting at the kitchen counter, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal and financial deception. By the time I returned from the gallery that evening, Andrew had moved his essential belongings to the city apartment he had previously used for his affair. On the counter was a signed copy of my settlement agreement. The month following that fateful Thanksgiving dinner was both challenging and liberating. The practical aspects of ending a 28-year marriage involved countless details, decisions, and adjustments. Yet with each form signed and each arrangement finalized, I felt lighter, as if shedding layers of a life that no longer served me. The divorce proceedings moved surprisingly quickly. Andrew, faced with the comprehensive evidence I had compiled, chose not to contest my terms. His primary concern became protecting his reputation at the firm. We worked through our respective attorneys, rarely communicating directly. When necessary, our interactions remained civil, but distant, like business associates concluding a transaction. Telling our children about the divorce was one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had. Lisa and Mark had witnessed their father's shocking Thanksgiving toast, but they deserved a more complete explanation. I invited them to the house the weekend after Thanksgiving prepared to answer their questions honestly without vilifying their father. "I always suspected Dad worked too much," Lisa said after I explained the situation, in broad strokes omitting the most painful details. "But an affair with his assistant, that's so cliched it's almost embarrassing." Mark's reaction was more visceral. "I'm going to talk to him," he declared, already reaching for his phone. "He can't treat you like this after everything you've done for our family." I gently placed my hand over his. "I appreciate your support, but this is between your father and me. I don't want to put you in the middle or ask you to take sides." "We're already in the middle, Mom," Lisa pointed out. "And there's no question whose side we're on. You've been the constant in our lives, the one who never missed a school event or forgot a birthday." Their immediate and unquestioning support brought tears to my eyes for the first time since the night I discovered the affair. I had been so focused on maintaining my composure, on not giving Andrew the satisfaction of seeing me crumble, that I had suppressed my own emotional response to the betrayal. Despite my protests, Mark did confront his father, calling him the day after our conversation. From what Lisa later told me, the discussion was heated and ended with Mark refusing to spend Christmas with Andrew as planned. While I hadn't wanted to create division between father and children, I couldn't deny the validation I felt knowing my son had stood up for me so fiercely. As news of our impending divorce spread through our social circle, I faced a range of reactions. Some friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the dissolution of a couple they had known for decades. Others reached out with casseroles and offers of support, treating me like I was terminally ill rather than simply ending a marriage. A few looked at me with barely concealed curiosity, hungry for gossip about what had gone wrong. The nights were the most challenging adjustment. After 28 years of sharing a bed with someone, the silence and emptiness of sleeping alone felt strange and disorienting. Our king-sized bed seemed cavernous, with just me in it. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night, momentarily confused by the absence of another body, another breath in the darkness. Yet there was liberation in this solitude, too. I could read in bed with the light on as long as I wanted these. I could watch documentaries that Andrew had always found boring. I could spread my arms and legs wide across the mattress, claiming territory that had always been negotiated. I could be fully myself without accommodation or compromise. As December progressed, I began to reclaim not just physical space, but emotional and intellectual territory as well. I enrolled in a French cooking class I had always wanted to take, but had postponed because Andrew preferred simple, familiar meals. I booked a solo trip to Florence for the spring, fulfilling a lifelong dream to see Italian Renaissance art in person. My gallery became a sanctuary during this period. I threw myself into planning a new exhibition featuring emerging female artists. The work was consuming and fulfilling, allowing me to focus on something positive and forward-looking. My assistant Gabriella provided quiet, steady support, taking on additional responsibilities without being asked when she noticed I was overwhelmed. At a gallery event in mid-December, I met Rachel Winters, a recently divorced art collector who had just moved to our area from Seattle. We bonded over our shared experiences, though her divorce had been amicable compared to mine. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork or even dividing the assets, Rachel confided over coffee after the event. It was redefining myself as a single person after being part of a couple for so long. Suddenly, all my stories started with I instead of we. That took some getting used to. Her observation resonated deeply with me. I had been Andrew and Donna for so long that reclaiming just Donna felt like meeting myself anew. Who was I without the role of Andrew's wife? What did I want my life to look like now that I was writing the script alone? These questions led me to expand the gallery in ways I had previously hesitated to pursue. I reached out to artists in New York and Boston, broadening our geographic representation. I introduced a series of evening workshops teaching various artistic techniques, which quickly became popular in the community. I renovated the back room of the gallery into a small cafe space where visitors could linger over coffee while discussing the artwork. Each of these changes represented a decision made solely by me without negotiation or compromise. Some succeeded brilliantly, others required adjustment, but all of them were authentically mine. There was a profound satisfaction in that ownership. The first time I ran into a mutual friend who asked about Andrew, I surprised myself with my response. "He's building a new life," I said simply. "And so am I." I realized I had moved beyond anger to something approaching acceptance. Not approval of his actions, certainly, but acknowledgement that our marriage had ended and we were both moving forward separately. By Christmas, which I spent with Lisa, Mark, my parents, and Nancy at my sister's home in Oregon, I found myself genuinely enjoying the holiday rather than simply going through the motions. We hiked in the snow-covered Cascade Mountains, played board games by the fire, and shared stories and laughter without the strained undercurrent that had characterized family gatherings in recent years. On New Year's Eve, while many were celebrating with parties and champagne, I sat alone on my back porch with a glass of wine watching the stars. I reflected on the extraordinary changes of the past year and felt an unexpected sense of gratitude, not for the betrayal or pain, but for the strength I had discovered within myself, the supportive relationships that had deepened, and the new possibilities that now stretched before me. "Life doesn't end," I whispered to the night sky. "It just begins again in a different form." 1 year after that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, I found myself preparing to host the holiday again. Much had changed in those 12 months. The divorce was finalized by February, with all terms settled as I had proposed. The gallery had expanded to include a second location in a neighboring town. I had sold our family home and purchased a charming craftsman bungalow closer to the gallery, a space that was entirely my own. As I arranged flowers for my new dining table, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The raw pain of betrayal had gradually transformed into something else, not quite forgiveness, but a form of acceptance that allowed me to move forward without being defined by what had happened. This year's guest list was smaller, but more meaningful. My parents would be there along with Nancy and her husband. Lisa was bringing her new boyfriend, a kind architect she had met through work. Mark was flying in from Seattle with his longtime partner David, whom he had finally felt comfortable introducing to the family after Andrew's departure. I had also invited Rachel, who had become a dear friend, and her college-age daughter Emma. Gabriella from the gallery would join us with her husband Miguel. It was an eclectic group connected not by obligation, but by genuine affection. Earlier that month, I had received surprising news about Andrew. His relationship with Jessica had ended after only 8 months. According to Lisa, who still maintained limited contact with her father, the breakup had been messy and public. Jessica had apparently discovered Andrew was seeing another woman, a client from his firm. The irony wasn't lost on me. More surprisingly, Andrew had sent me an email shortly after his breakup. It was the first direct communication we'd had in months. "Donna," he wrote, "I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately. The past year has forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself and my choices. I want to apologize for the pain I caused you. Our marriage deserved better than how I ended it. While I can't undo what happened, I want you to know that I recognize the hurt I inflicted. You handled everything with a dignity I didn't deserve. I hope you're finding happiness in your new life." I read the email several times before deciding not to respond. His apology, while seemingly sincere, didn't require acknowledgement from me. I had moved beyond needing his recognition of my pain or validation of my response. I wished him well in a general sense, but his journey was no longer connected to mine. My own healing process had been gradual and nonlinear. There were still moments when a memory would catch me off guard, a photo or song triggering a wave of sadness for what had been lost. But these moments became less frequent and less overwhelming with time. Therapy had been instrumental in my recovery. My therapist, Dr. Amara Jackson, had helped me recognize patterns in my marriage that I had overlooked or accepted. I learned that in trying to be the perfect wife, I had sometimes silenced my own needs and desires. This awareness didn't excuse Andrew's betrayal, but helped me understand how I could build healthier relationships in the future. Healing isn't about forgetting the past, Dr. Jackson often reminded me. It's about integrating it into your story in a way that doesn't continue to cause pain. I had taken this philosophy to heart, acknowledging the good years of my marriage while also recognizing its end as a necessary transition rather than just a tragedy. The woman I was becoming was stronger, more self-aware, and paradoxically more open to connection, despite the risk of being hurt again. My relationship with Lisa and Mark had deepened in unexpected ways. Without the buffer of their father, our conversations became more direct and authentic. They saw me not just as their mother, but as a woman navigating significant life changes with courage. In turn, I was able to relate to them more as adults with their own complex lives, rather than simply as my children. The friendships that sustained me through this period proved invaluable. Beyond Nancy and Rachel, I had connected with a group of women in similar life transitions. We met monthly for what we jokingly called reinvention dinners, where we shared challenges and celebrated victories in our evolving lives. These women understood implicitly what I was experiencing in a way that even my closest family members sometimes couldn't. My professional life flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. The expanded gallery received recognition from a prominent art magazine as one of the top regional galleries discovering new talent. I was invited to jury several prestigious art competitions and speak at a conference on women in the arts. The business skills I had developed out of necessity now served me well as I grew what had once been a modest enterprise into a respected institution in the art world. Financial independence, something I had never fully experienced, despite my career, brought a profound sense of security. Managing my investments, making decisions about property, and planning for retirement without consultation or compromise was empowering. The settlement from the divorce provided a cushion, but it was my own business acumen that would secure my future. As I finished setting the Thanksgiving table with my grandmother's china and fresh flowers, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This home, this gathering, this life was authentically mine. The path that led here had been painful at times, but I wouldn't trade the woman I had become for the blissful ignorance of my former life. When my guests began arriving, the house filled with genuine warmth and laughter. There were no undercurrents of tension, no performances of happiness masking deeper issues. We shared a meal prepared with love, told stories, and expressed gratitude that felt authentic rather than obligatory. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room with coffee and pie, Mark raised his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, echoing the words that had begun the upheaval a year earlier, but with an entirely different spirit. "To my mom, who taught us all about resilience, grace, and the art of beginning again. We love you." As glasses clinked and warm smiles surrounded me, I felt the truth of what I had learned through this journey. Sometimes the most painful endings bring the most beautiful beginnings. The betrayal that I thought would break me had instead revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. What I would say to anyone facing a similar crossroads is this: the end of one chapter isn't the end of your story. It's painful and disorienting to have your life upended by betrayal or loss. The future you imagined vanishes in an instant, leaving you adrift. But in that space of uncertainty lies the opportunity to rediscover yourself, to build something authentic and meaningful from the pieces that remain. The key is to allow yourself to feel the pain without being consumed by it, to recognize that your worth isn't diminished by someone else's choices, to understand that healing isn't linear and some days will be harder than others, and most importantly, to remain open to the new possibilities that emerge when you're forced to change course. I'm not grateful for Andrew's betrayal. I won't pretend that the pain was worth it or necessary for my growth, but I am grateful for who I've become through weathering that storm. The woman who hosts Thanksgiving now is more authentic, more compassionate, and more alive than the woman who stood shocked at her dining table a year ago. If you're watching this and facing your own moment of reckoning in a relationship, remember that your response to betrayal doesn't have to be written by someone else. You can choose dignity over drama, preparation over panic, and ultimately renewal over resentment. When someone proposes a toast to new beginnings without you, the most powerful response is to be already ready for that new beginning yourself. I'd love to hear about your own experiences of resilience and renewal in the comments below. How have you navigated unexpected endings and new beginnings in your life? Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too can emerge stronger from life's most painful chapters. Thank you for being part of my journey, and I wish you the strength to face whatever challenges come your way with the same dignity and courage you've shown by listening to my story.